I'll let you ask your question before I tell the whole tale.
Yes, so we have cultural relativism, moral relativism, there's epistemic relativism, the idea that epistemology is merely a product of one's paradigm and there are no universal epistemological standards by which we can appraise the truth value of statements.
Yeah,
so,
this is all created by the sophists, essentially.
Yeah. So, and the Frankfurt School were very instrumental in this, and some have concluded that the Frankfurt School was a sort of Jewish intellectual movement. Obviously, you know, it goes without saying that not every single Jew on planet Earth agrees with the opinions of the Frankfurt School or with people like Franz Boas, who was also Jewish. But there are some who would analyze this as a sort of attack on Western civilization, and attempt to undermine.
Sorry to interrupt you there, and I should say that members of the Frankfurt School were guys like Karl Marx and George Wilhelm Hegel, where we get the Hegelian dialectic. Wilhelm Reich, that promoted the so-called sexual revolution, was out of there. And then ideas like neo-feudalism and the New Age movement and student movements, and these ideas actually came out of the Frankfurt School. Now, I tried to find a paper that someone sent me and I lost it, but the top members of the Israeli government, and I wish I found that paper first, admit that there is zero difference between, Zio-racism or Zionism and communism. And of course, the Jewish Bolshevik Revolution in Russia killed 66 million plus people. And of course, they have kept the entire focus on what Hitler did since World War II to keep the focus off of what the Jews actually did in Russia. And so, there is this whole cover-up there with that. But, one thing that I have found in researching MKUltra, which I found very startling at first, was that at least... and we're always told that MKUltra was, it came out of Germany. It was all the Germans and these German researchers and all of this stuff. But when you actually look at the MKUltra researchers and their backgrounds, even the ones that came out of Operation Paperclip, at least 50, maybe upwards to 70% of them were Jewish and not German backgrounds. And what's interesting is I only know of one or two Chinese and Japanese MKUltra researchers, no Latino researchers, no black researchers, and maybe 20–30% Anglo-American type, British also, and then one Egyptian doctor. And so, when you look at this, it's rather startling because, obviously Judaism is supposed to only compose 1–3% of the population, somewhere in there, but yet 50 to 70% of the MKUltra researchers have this one specific background. And, that is a bit frightening, but when we get in and we look at Zio-racism and the Talmud and all of this stuff, the Talmud is very clear that Gentiles aren't so-called humans or real men, and that only Jews are. And then you understand from there why so many Jews were involved in the human experiments, because the Talmud says that they're allowed to experiment on other people which they don't consider human.
Yeah, when you read the works of Frankfurt School authors like Adorno and Horkheimer, I would call Karl Marx, I would define Marx as being somewhat separate to the Frankfurt School, who were neo-Marxists, whereas Karl Marx was the originator of Marxism. And
my point was that he greatly influenced the Frankfurt School. Even if they came up with neo-Marxism, it was still largely influenced by him. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and these Jewish authors in the Frankfurt School, they were obsessed with preventing Holocaust 2.0, preventing National Socialism or Gentile unification.
What do you mean when you say Holocaust 2.0? Because
you have to define what Holocaust 1.0
right.
was.
I mean, are you talking about what the Bolshevik Jews did in Russia, or what do you mean by that? Are you talking about Dresden? I'm not sure. So
yeah, well, obviously they presupposed the official narrative of the so-called German Holocaust, which, as we know, many scholars like David Irving and Friedrich Tobin and others have brought into question. Jürgen Graf and others have questioned and have, in many instances, refuted claims of. But anyway, from their point of view, they wrote in terms of, oh, Auschwitz. Like, I think I read a phrase by Horkheimer, and it said, all sociology should be informed by the experience of Auschwitz from now on. And in fact, Kevin MacDonald has a quote from an Israeli historian who called sociology a Jewish religion and called the Frankfurt School a Jewish sect. So there's no doubt this was heavily influenced by Jews. And I mean, the thing is, you have to understand what happened in National Socialist Germany. Basically, Jews were dislodged from power, right? Jews were disempowered because Gentiles in Germany, or the German ethnic group, was able to unify. And I think what they did was study what enabled Germans to unify. And you had the patriarchal family, the church, strong ethnocentrism. You know, the Frankfurt School had this F scale, the fascist scale, by which they gauged the extent to which someone was fascistic, and they did surveys, and if someone said they were patriotic or they loved their flag or whatever, that would be an indicator of being fascistic. And so this whole...
sorry to interrupt you. Meanwhile, Israel is one of the most fascist countries in the world, where interracial marriage is disallowed, where the country's under apartheid, where every year they bomb their neighbors that they stole the land from, you know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And because they, you know, have this stuff written down in a book that their own priests wrote down 2,000 years ago, they think that it gives them automatic right to land that the Palestinians have lived on for 1,500 years or 1,000 years, you know.
Yeah, so my point is, though, that I think that all the phenomena that you identify, whether it's the destabilization of the family, the attack on health and nutrition, which we'll come to later, or this attempt to inebriate people overtly with drugs and alcohol, that all of this is clearly an attempt to prevent people unifying in the way that they did in Germany, and therefore ensuring the hegemony of a certain group in the long term. Would that be a fair way to describe things? Oh,
I would say for sure. And it appears that there is really some sort of unification between the elite Anglos, from England, and the leading Jewish factions as well. And they seem to be working the same agenda. And so, it's for that reason, it's very important that we expose Zio racism and, all of this stuff, and expose all of the anti-Germanicism, et cetera, that's been promoted in the media and elsewhere. I mean, obviously when we get in and we look at MKUltra and we see, who are really involved, then we have the purpose of constantly blaming Germany for MKUltra in the USA that was run largely by Jewish researchers.
Yeah, Veronica Clark has debunked this in her research, because she says basically all these people say is, look at Operation Paperclip, where you had these German very intelligent scientists told, well, you can either go to jail or you can come and have a reasonable life in America working on our different science programs. And from that isolated occurrence of a handful of German doctors coming over to the States, all the crimes of the CIA subsequently are pinned on as if an extension of National Socialist Germany in America.
Sure,
right?
And this is totally promoted by guys like Dave Emery, et cetera, too, constantly. The whole CIA and everything, it's because the Nazis infiltrated us. But when you actually get in and you look at many of the names of the researchers that were brought in under Operation Paperclip, many of them were Jewish, not German. In fact, I would say a very large proportion of them were Jewish.
Yes. So perhaps we can now get into some of the etymological roots of some of the phrases that people are familiar with. I mean,